Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here presenting and sharing the insights of our research and also of the Atlas of Innovation Districts project that my fellow co-founder, Jeremy, Burke, and myself, we have developed at Harvard University over the last several years. Essentially, the project started as a research project at Harvard University between the schools of design and engineering, but it translated into a city analytics tool that we convey through our startup Aretian, Urban Analytics and Design, that we can use to provide insights to city government officials and other decision makers around economic development, urban development, and innovation districts in general. Essentially, the theoretical foundation for our model is the follow-up work to research developed over the last 12 years by a couple of research teams between Harvard and MIT, led by Professor Ricardo Hausman at the Kennedy School and Professor Cesar Hidalgo at MIT. And what they do is they have created this network theory-driven data science model that conveys and summarizes what is the collective know-how of nations around the world. You can access it openly. It's called the Atlas of Economic Complexity. And you can pick and choose each and every country around the world and understand which are the comparative strengths in terms of the collective know-how of these nations. Because the main insight from the research is that the main indicator that has the highest level of accuracy in terms of predicting economic growth and economic success and also distributed prosperity is the collective know-how that society has in terms of what is the network of knowledge, talent, and industries that create competitiveness and allow this nation to be propelling their economic progress. Now, the main limitation that this model has is that essentially it's only limited to aggregate indexes at the national level. So they've been using it to provide advice and guidance to national governments around the world. But the problem is that provided that the majority of decision making occurs at the city level or at the regional level or metropolitan level, that tool cannot provide insights by itself. So that's basically what Jeremy and I have been developing over the last several years. And we conveyed the insights of our research through the so-called Atlas of Innovation Districts, where in the first 10 essentially, we have analyzed systematically how the top 50 in innovation districts across the United States, in cities like New York, in Austin, in the Boston area, in California, in Boulder, Colorado, and many others, shape their innovation communities. And essentially, the type of analysis we want to do is how do different types of urban development impact economic development, and how do they enable economic growth, prosperity, and more egalitarian economic and inclusive economic growth. And the main lesson that we learn is that there are three types of networks that contribute to that economic growth. It's the network of talent, the individual persons that work in concert in companies or in local governments, in technology transfer entities, in research centers, to develop new solutions, new products and new services to address complex problems facing society. The second type of network is what we call the network of organizational structures, essentially research centers, technology firms, technology transfer entities, and how do people relate to one another to create these new solutions. And finally, the network of urban infrastructure, how do we design the physical spaces in our cities to unleash this economic growth. And in that sense, we have created profiles of these top 50 innovation districts across the US, and in which we basically summarize how these three networks are characterized and how those three networks shape the economic growth and the economic development of these communities. And here you can see some examples, like the case of Boston Seaport in southeastern Boston, Silicon Alley in Midtown Manhattan in New York, or the Pittsburgh Innovation District, among many others. Now, essentially, when you jump into these one-sheet summary profiles for these different innovation districts, what we provide is a high-level summary of how do these three networks, of the quality of the network of talent, the quality of the urban infrastructure, and the quality of the network of industries that play out, contribute to the economic growth of the area. And essentially, by having this deeper understanding of what is the regional or local collective know-how of that district, what we can do is have a much better understanding of how does that community or that district shape the future of economic growth within the region. And now my fellow co-founder and research colleague, Jeremy Burke, will start describing some of the main discoveries and insights from the project.
Thank you. So the Atlas is available for download on our website, Aretian.com. where you can read the summary as well as have access to the 50 one-page profiles of the innovation districts throughout the United States. Also on our website, you can see here a description of all the different innovation districts across the entire United States. Each single one of these dots represents a part of the census within the United States, as well as the information that we have on the businesses, and as well as the innovation metrics for each district. So through this map, you can zoom in and out. You can click on any one of the districts, and you can see what is the composition and the profile of these urban communities. When we look at some of the findings, we can really see that innovation districts tend to be good for the communities in that they generally are providing new types of innovation, on average 3.4 times more than a regular district. But they also have other benefits. They have 9 times more employment, 15 times more knowledge-intensive employment. Overall, they provide 20 times more wealth per citizen, and also they have 5 times more job support and creation. We see that these innovation districts are also generally meritocratic, so often people who are hardworking and put in the effort to build and start a new company, along with the right type of financing and capital, tend to perform well. When we look at the vast majority of different types of innovation districts, here specifically looking at the Boston ecosystem, we can compare and contrast how innovative each district is to one another. Here in yellow you see the Kendall and MIT district. In red, Harvard Square. In purple, you have the Longwood Medical Center. And then in green, you have the Boston Seaport District. The Boston Seaport District was modeled after the 22 Arroba District here in Barcelona. And often the question is, are some of these areas really economic zones, or are they innovation districts? Here we're able to show through our analysis that this is actually more of an economic district than an innovation district, based on the total number of people who are working in innovation-related activities. One thing that we're very interested in is understanding how are these districts created, what are their anchor institutions, what types of urban design characteristics do they have, how do they give back to the community, and what are their general effects for the broader society. In order to do this, we have created ultimately analysis on 5 different anchor institution types. We think this is important for financing models and also for new urban development projects, because the leading institution, which makes an effort in order to contribute to new development projects, ultimately has an impact on the type of community that will be created. So if we compare, for example, a city government-led effort versus one which is driven by entrepreneurs, we can see that the city government has generally more inclusive housing, public space, and amenities for the general population, whereas some of the other clusters, such as the entrepreneurial, tend to have more urban chaos. They can have greater levels of inefficiencies, because they are driven mostly by growth models. Many of the other clusters, such as industry clusters, can provide high levels of employment, but generally they focus on a single industry. One reason why we are mapping out all of these different types and classifying them across the United States is because every single one of these efforts is a single design option. Unlike with a product design where you can iterate, such as with the iPhone, you can have multiple types coming out and generation after generation. In terms of urban development, you can really only do it once, and the impact will last for many, many years into the future. Therefore, we want to be able to provide decision makers the right types of information so that they can make the best decision at the beginning of the project to then finance everything moving forward. Overall, when we begin to look and filter through some of the data, we can easily see where the most innovative communities are throughout the United States. Overall, we can see that innovation is ultimately very difficult. Out of the total population in the United States, there's generally 3 million people working in these areas, and really 1 million of them are doing the technical work that's driving the innovation. So when we're looking at either education policies or organizational policies, or also this competition for talent, we can see that here its innovation is really difficult, and these numbers support that. In addition, we wanted to understand from a design perspective how we can design the right types of environments to support innovation. Here, this graph talks about the right levels of density in terms of building height and concentration for supporting innovation. We consider it like a phase change. You can have a low-dense urban environment of suburban communities. You can have mid-rise buildings, and then you can have high-rise buildings. What we see is that innovation tends to be the most strong in communities where the building heights are between 5 and 7 stories. Basically, this means that there's enough density of high-performing individuals and companies located in a geographic area, but there's not necessarily the urban chaos and all the other necessities which are required to support life in high-density environments like New York City. We're also interested in terms of governing and finance. We want to know what are the trade-offs. If you do this, what will be the outcome? So here we have in our model basically 5 phases for urban innovation, of which in 2 of them, the first and the third, we can begin to have an effort to shape and inform both the urban design, but then also the organizational structures of these communities. So the first one, looking at the inputs, what types of spaces are we going to be building? What companies are we going to bring into our community? What density are we going to have? That's the first one. That ultimately sets the levels of innovation intensity that will then be in existence in that community. Then we can look at the innovation dynamics. What are the policies and the procedures that are going to support the teams going on into the future? Just as in the first talk, the founder's journey is rather difficult, and we can see in such good examples such as the MIT community, there's many different support mechanisms that are in place to help founders and companies complete the journey, both in terms of financing and capital, but also just organizational and legal considerations. With this, we can then ultimately measure what is the performance. So what are generally the new types of patents, the products, and the new services which are created within each industry based on location. And then we can see what are the overall societal benefits. Just to show you some examples of different areas, we can compare and contrast apples to apples these different areas around the US. And in addition, we are beginning to expand this atlas into Europe, and then we hope to go into other areas of the world as well. We're interested also in understanding what are the phasing and the needs of these communities. And here in this hierarchy of needs, this pyramid, in order to have a really thriving urban ecosystem, there are many steps that are necessary in order to achieve that. And here we basically lay out this diagram in order to allow communities to assess whether or not they are meeting all of these different goals. And often when you find a community which might be unequal or unfair, then maybe they're missing some of these components. And so we think it's important to assess urban ecosystems in this way. Lastly, before Ramon finishes up, when we look at and contrast the different ecosystems across one another, we can see what are their general contributions and how do they match up against one another. In this graph, what we're looking at is what are the total number of people that are actually working inside of these communities on innovation-related activities. And on the top, you have the Oak Ridge Laboratory in Tennessee, which is home of the world's fastest supercomputer. This is one of the U.S. government's research facilities that's really doing high levels of innovation, and one of the innovation types that we spoke about before. Then at the bottom we have Cornell Tech, which is a brand new innovation center aligned with Cornell University. And this is a district which is just starting. It's only in its third year in existence. And so we are able to map and see how these innovation districts change over time.
And in essence, what we would like to convey today with you is that the insights of the data-driven, rigorous scientific research that we have conveyed over the last several years around how different types of urban development, knowledge-intensive activity concentration, as well as economic development shape our communities. We think that both the existing insights that we shared through the report and the interactive map, as well as the tool that we have developed that can be deployed in the States, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, Latin America, in Asia, and beyond, can help provide insights to provide decision-making in terms of how should we finance our communities in the future, what should be the main drivers for the economic growth, what are the local networks of talent, what is the comparative advantage of our community, and how should we devote our efforts so that we have inclusive growth. And with those final thoughts, we would extremely appreciate if you can join us for the discussion. Thank you so much.
I think we have a few minutes left, so please take a seat. Because this is an interesting, very interesting research, and a lot of data you've been analyzed, and a lot of interesting models, but it's very high level still. And I can imagine there are a lot of policymakers here at city level on the floor, are here, and especially looking for what can they learn from this, especially about financing. So can you explain a bit about that? So for example, does it help them for risk reduction or how to structure specific public-private partnerships?
Absolutely. And one of the first things that we should mention in that regard is that the insights from the research and the types of recommendations that the model provides can help decrease dramatically the uncertainty about many of these decisions. Very often, city government officials and decision makers about economic development and urban development make a lot of decisions that are critical for the community using gut feeling or very traditional methods that do not encompass the complexity and do not explain what are going to be the types of externalities, both positive and negative, of these types of urban and economic development. In that sense, the model, the urban analytics engine specific for the Atlas of Innovation Districts, can decrease the uncertainty about those decisions and provide ranges of what could be the different expected outcome in terms of potential gentrification processes, for example, for the community, or to what extent that's going to be contributing to decrease the level of unemployment, for example, or induce growth in wages for the community, among other things, as well as when you are mindful of the 5 types of entities or institutions that are shaping this urban and economic development, you can have a much better understanding of how should we structure the finance models to support those 5 anchor institutions to succeed in their endeavor.
Okay, very interesting. And I see that we have to conclude this session. I still have a lot of other questions, and I guess some other people in the audience also. But we're going to have a break.